welcome to Who's Social Model. It's an event that we've been planning for a few months now. I am just going to say a little bit about the company that I co-found, which is Triple C. Triple C is an organisation that create projects that break down the barriers for disability in the arts. So we create quite a few different projects that sort of work around representation and inclusion as well. So one of our big projects that we do is we go into SEN schools where lots of drama has been cut from the curriculum. It's quite damaging, as I'm sure you can all imagine, cutting drama from anybody's life, but to cut it from a young person with a disability, that can be really damaging later on in life. So one of our sort of major projects is that, and then we also run the Disabled Artists Networking Community, DANC, which some of you might be on the mailing list for. If you're not, I'll get your email address at the end of the day. And what's really exciting about DANC is we're having so many people now come to us when opportunities are around, because they want us to be able to share these opportunities around as many professional disabled artists as possible. So we've got quite a few projects underway. And we were just really excited about working with Unlimited to create this day today. I think there's going to be so many different opinions in the room, and it's just going to be really exciting for us to explore them and discuss them. Pass over to Jo to talk a little bit about Unlimited.
Hi, I'm Jo Bowden. I'm senior producer for Unlimited. I've got literally just a couple of slides that explain what we do. So Unlimited is a commissioning programme, so we're funded by Arts Council England. Basically, we're one of their strategic diversity strands. We've also brought in other money from other funders to swell that pot, if you like. But basically, our role is about giving money to disabled artists. And we say it's high quality work by extraordinary artists, and our aim is to embed those artists within the cultural sector and thereby transform the perception of disability. What we mean by that is just make disability part of the normative experience of everyday life within the UK. We don't mean transform it in some magical way so that we're all cured, or that everybody starts seeing us as glorious beings. We are, of course, glorious beings, but that's not the aim of the programme. And when we talk about what we do, we don't talk about funding artists to make work about disability, because we don't think as a funder it's our job to tell artists what to do. We think it's our job to put in place a mechanism that's accessible so that the widest range of disabled artists can apply, but we don't think a funder should dictate what somebody makes or doesn't make work about, because we think sometimes artists come up with the best ideas when they break rules and when they kind of redefine things, and that's an artist's job rather than, we think, a funder's job. Yes, so the funders, because we're legally and contractually obliged to mention them at every particular point, Arts Council England, Spirit of 2012, Arts Council of Wales and British Council at the moment. And I said that we're a programme rather than an organisation, and we're delivered by Shape Arts and Arts Admin working together, but we're not an organisation, we don't have a building or anything like that. Yeah, you could do that. I think that's probably it, really. We funded a range of works, large and small. This is one of the larger works, which is Naomi Latmire floating attached to 20,000 helium balloons on the stage of Sydney Opera House. It's a good example, I think, of some of the audacity of the works, and also the way in which they can be seen in many different lights. So a lot of people see this and they don't think it's a piece relating to impairment or relating to disability at all. If you talk to Naomi, it very much is, because it's about what does it take to lift a disabled person? What does it take, that extra effort that it takes, given how difficult sometimes society makes it for us. Another one there, which is Helen Hall, who is a disabled artist based in Northern Ireland. And her work very much took her own specific experience of impairment. She's a dancer and she's visually impaired. And she wanted to use her sight as a choreographic tool. So she created a beautiful dance piece where you never saw the whole thing. What you saw was flashes of movement highlighted in very discrete spots of light. So she was trying to use her experience of the world as a way of saying, this is actually a really beautiful way to see the world, it's a really beautiful way to see dance, and I want to use that choreographically because I'm really interested in exploring that territory. Sometimes this is a piece by Cameron Morgan, who's a lone disabled artist based up in Scotland, part of a series called TV Classics. And this was, he did 10 decades of television, and the televisions kept changing shape, and the wallpaper kept changing, and obviously the subject matter kept changing. And again, there's nothing within that subject matter that is directly related to disability at all. One might say that his style of painting is linked to his experience as an outsider artist, because as a learning disabled person, he's not able to access the very formal art academy way of learning to paint. So instead he's painting much more intuitively and in his own style, in that way. Yeah. Brilliant. Stop there. Right, so that's the unlimited spiel out of the way. The other reason that we were really interested in being part of this day is because we work with 280 artists now, and there isn't a commonly held understanding or approach to the way in which artists work in terms of different models of impairment. We have many people who do work according to what we're going to discuss today around the social model. And we also have a number of artists who say, I don't know what that is, or I know what that is, and I don't use it to frame my work. So we thought it was quite interesting to actually take the lid off that as a conversation, and to really create a safe space to explore a number of different perspectives around that, which is why we've kept the numbers really small. It's why we've not shouted about it on social media, because we want to have the conversations first, and then look at what can we draw out from that would be interesting and useful to a much wider range of people. Yeah, I think that's probably all I've got to say.
What we're going to do, we'll just introduce you to the panel. If you just say your name and sort of organisation or what it is that you do, and then we'll come out to you guys so that you can all say your name and your art form.
Hello everybody, my name is Vicky Rayford-Sinnott, and I'm a disabled playwright, theatre director and spoken word artist, and I'm based in the northeast of England.
I am Cheryl Martin, and I'm a disabled playwright, poet, director. I work with Black Gold Art and sometimes here at home, and I'm based in Manchester.
Hi, my name's Tony Heaton, I'm a sculptor. I'm based in the northwest, but I'm currently living in Wakefield, where I've got a show about to happen on Wednesday. That's my plug.
Keep plugging.
Hi, my name is Paul Whittaker. I'm a bipolar artist, writer and filmmaker, and I'm based in Cardiff.
We have our two wonderful interpreters here, Alex and Siobhan.
And what I asked them to do was to talk about kind of what the social model did or didn't mean to them, and where their understanding of it kind of came from, if it's something that really informs their process. So I'll shut up and pass straight over to Tony. So tell us a bit more about who you are, and take it away.
All right, well, I'm a sculptor, but I'm also the chair of Shape, which I forgot to say earlier, but I thought I'd better say now, because I don't want James to feedback that I never mentioned Shape at this event. Okay, that's a joke, James. Okay, Joe asked me to speak first, and I thought I'd put some slides together, because what I'm going to say is I sort of need to put some words up there, but I will also say what words I put on there, because I can just about see them. I might just sneak forward a little bit. I thought I'd show this picture, because I want to look at that. It's amazing, just moves back when you say that. That's great. So my title was How the Social Model Changed My Life. And to do that, I need to put some historical context to it. I became disabled in 1970. I just thought, fuck me, that's nearly 50 years ago, isn't it? I suddenly feel really old. But as a wheelchair rider in the world in 1970, there were no drop curbs, there were no texture paving, there was no lifts with little voices in them to tell you which floor you were getting out at. And it was an incredibly hostile place to be. And the world has changed slightly since then. And if you wanted to travel somewhere, like I did today to get here on a train, you went in this thing, which was called the goods van. And believe me, this is truly what I travelled in. I went all the way to Glasgow in one of these. It's basically a wooden shed on wheels that hung off the end of the back of the train. For young people, you won't believe this. But this is where all the mailbags were put. And inside that wooden shed is a wire cage, which the mailbags were locked in. And we were put in to that on Preston Station, me and another wheelchair user, to go up to Glasgow. And there's no heating, there's no facilities. You know what I mean by facilities. There ain't nothing in there. And you're chained in, and you hope that when you get to Glasgow, somebody's going to remember that somebody put you in there, and they're going to get you out. And I can tell you, as we were going up to Scotland, looking through the gaps in the wooden floor, I could see snow on the lines. I mean, it was immensely cold. So that's the kind of inhospitable existence, you know, I came into as a disabled person. And it became clear to me that disabled people patronised, institutionalised for our own good and our own safety. We were marginalised and hidden from plain sight. And those with power and rank, mostly non-disabled people, continued to create structures and systems that were inaccessible to us. And then something turned that on its head. So I now want to go to my next slide, please. That's great, that was all fantastic timing. Can you come to all my talks? It was just so good. Ta-da! Social model. I love serendipity, it's just so good, isn't it? Serendipity happens all the time in the disabled people's world, doesn't it? Anyway, from humour to sadness, actually, because Mike Oliver, who promoted the term social model in his writing, died earlier this month. His obituary was in the Guardian newspaper on Wednesday, and it's on social media if you want to look it up. Various people have put it out there on social media. So it's very, very sad to be talking about the social model, knowing that Mike has died fairly recently, and he was one of 3 people, really, who promoted this idea of the social model. The other was a guy called Vic Finkelstein, who died some time ago. And when they sat around talking about this, because a guy called Paul Hunt wrote a letter to the Guardian and said, how come we're socially isolated? Oh, that's it, socially isolated. Why are we put away in institutions? Is it because the world is not accessible to us? So he started to talk about the social model of disability and why, according to Mike, it's society that disables people. So that's why the social model is called the social model. Society disables. It's something imposed on top of our impairments by the way we are unnecessarily isolated and excluded from full participation. And he argued that it was not impairment that was the main cause of our social exclusion, but it was the way that society responded to us. And I just wanted to add that models are a way of translating ideas into practice. And the idea behind the social model was that of externally imposed restrictions. And the social model is nothing more complicated than a clear focus on the economic, environmental and cultural barriers encountered by people who are viewed as having some form of impairment. So that might be the education system, employment, public transport, public buildings, and pretty much anything out there that is created in a way that makes a barrier to our inclusion. In addition, our oppression is perpetuated by negative images of us in the media and stereotypes about us in film and TV. So I just want to so the social model, I should say what's on the slide, it defines disability as a social construct, it asks the question, where is the problem, and it locates it in social organisation, people's attitudes and the environment, not in the individual's impairment. And it identifies barriers and discrimination as the cause of disability. So when I talk about being a disabled person, I'm not talking about my impairment, I'm talking about being disabled by the way that society is constructed and people's attitudes towards me. Okay, and I can give you a million examples. Every day there is an example of that sort of oppression.
But don't, because you're over time already, and
Am
you've
I?
still got more slides to
I
go.
have. Right, I'll go quickly. I had completely forgotten I had a 5 minute.
I haven't.
No, sorry. I do slip off message. I just thought I'd really show this very quickly as a subtle way that we're discriminated against. So this is a government questionnaire, all right, that everybody fills in every 10 years. It's a census. And in black it says, are your difficulties in understanding others mainly due to a hearing problem? What the social model would do with that is turn it upside down and say, are your difficulties in understanding people mainly due to their inability to communicate with you? Okay, you get the message. The mainstream, does your health problem, disability, prevent you from going out as often as, or as far as you would like? What the social model would say is, what is it about the local environment that makes it difficult for you to get about in your neighbourhood? Okay, so I only used 2 because I've forgotten that I'd only got 5 minutes. Right, next slide. Also, people say, well, I don't really know what disability arts is, so I thought I'd give you a handy definition. Art made by disabled people drawing upon a lived experience of disability. Okay, so if a disabled artist paints a flower and it might be a brilliant flower, but it wouldn't be thought of as being disability art. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is just a really quick overview of the medical model, which we refute. So the medical model says the problem is this person who's defective, they can't use bits of their body, or whatever it is. They need help from us to get on a train, and this is the medical approach. Can we have the next slide, please? And what the social model says is, no, actually, it's segregated education, prejudice, lack of accessible communication system, badly designed buildings, poverty and low incomes. Okay, next. So that actually is the end of my 5 minutes, which is stretched a little bit. But I just wanted to finish with a Mike Oliver quote, because he said the social model is a practical tool. It's not a theory, it's not an idea, and it's not a concept. I have suggested that too much time has already been spent discussing it rather than attempting to use it to produce social and political change. If we imagine that throughout human history, the carpenters and builders of the world had spent their time talking about whether the hammer was an adequate tool for the purposes of building houses, we would still be living in caves. End. Thank you. And apologies for going over time.
Okay, if you pass the mic, Cheryl's next.
Okay.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, I've never been able to stick to time either. So forgive me if I speed up talking because I'm terrified of having the gong sound. So my own situation as far as the social model is concerned, my problems have, been to deal with stereotypes that people have about people with mental health problems, and especially about women with mental health problems, and then sort of lack of sympathy and empathy, as one website put it, from organizations. So just to say first with organizations, I take antidepressants every night that put me to sleep because I have a very hard time getting to sleep. I'm sorry, stupid phone, you dumbass thing. Hold on a second. Oh, so sorry. I do hate this. Okay. I take the antidepressants every night to go to sleep because I have a really hard time getting to sleep and staying asleep, but they also make it hard to wake back up in the mornings. And to put it very clearly, about years and years ago when I was having a major clinical depression, quite severe, almost died, and died almost not because I overdosed this time, but simply because I'm getting older and my body can't take the physical sort of depredations that you go through when you're depressed. And, I had to take off work. When I came back, I was still half dead, but my sick had run out. So I had to come back because I needed the money and I couldn't stay out on sick leave. And I tried to explain the problems with sleep, but the head of the organization wasn't having it. But the front of house person did listen, and what she did was she put in beds for me. So she put in one upstairs in the dressing room and one downstairs in the dressing room, so that when I needed to go to sleep during the day, I could. And that made all the difference between me being able to keep that job and me having to leave that job. And so it takes just a little bit of understanding and imagination to accommodate people. So for instance, right now I'm working at a grassroots publisher here in town, and when I got there, I didn't even have to explain all about my medication because somebody on the same medication was already there, and she'd already blazed the trail so that we could have flexible time and come in when we wake up and then just stay until we're finished whatever we have to do during the day. It really does not take a lot for organizations to think a little bit and be flexible. And being flexible for people who are disabled helps, you know, loads of other people, like people with young children, women in general who have trouble with childcare and, you know, and having to leave, for instance, pick their kids up from school. It's, you know, to be, you know, if you're right with one group of people, you'll be right by a huge group of people. So our rights benefit everybody. I didn't come out as mentally ill until about 12 years ago when I had that massive clinical. And when I started doing solo theater work with my first show, Alaska, what I wanted was to start explaining what it really feels like to grow up with severe depression, because I've been like this as long as I can remember. I can't remember, but back before I was about 8, and since I've been 8, I've been quite severely depressed. There are a growing number of shows that you'll see that are supposed to be about mental health, but a lot of times they're from the point of view of a partner, a child, or somebody who has to deal with the problem of, you know, somebody who has severe mental illness. It's not from our point of view. When I did Alaska, you remember The Beast from the East around this time last year? I was in Harrogate and I did this show which was about my severe depression and being in an asylum. There happened to be a nurse who was training at that asylum while I was there. And she said it was the first time she'd heard from a patient what that place was actually like. And I was quite harsh about that place because it was a nightmare for me. I went through, when I first came to this country, I was absolutely terrified once I heard of it, of being sectioned. And deep down, I'm still terrified of being sectioned. And that fear just stalked me all the time. And that place was not safe. While I was there, a woman committed suicide. I was beaten up by another patient. It was just a dumping ground. And the fact that she'd never heard from a patient what it was like to be incarcerated in a place like that, I thought was amazing. And again, this is a lack of understanding about what it means to be in my skin. When I was first diagnosed, I have severe depression and borderline personality disorder. And I know that here, especially a lot of activists, especially female activists, feel that that's a diagnosis that's overdiagnosed, overly ascribed to women. But in my case, I have to say that the diagnosis was completely accurate. I was part of, I went to National, it wasn't until I was 27 and went to the National Institute of Mental Health in the States that I was accurately treated or given any kind of treatment that ever worked. And that was a diagnostic protocol that was looking at the definition of who is a borderline. So when you read National Institute of Mental Health definition of a borderline, that's me. And, you know, I'm part of how they came up with that description. And now they're calling it emotionally unstable personality disorder, which, of course, if you're a woman, you know, what does that sound like? That's ridiculous. I don't see how they think that's better. They seem to think that's better than borderline. As far as I'm concerned, all the labels are a bit problematic. But the point is, you know, can you get any help for what's going on with you? When I was first diagnosed, that was back in 1987, and what they said was that personality disorders couldn't be treated. So I was given a whole bunch of medication that didn't quite work, and sort of left to rot until I was in my 40s. actually till I was in my 50s. And during this time, when I was in this country, I had a psychiatrist for 15 years, the same psychiatrist. And at the end of the 15 years, he said that there had never been enough of me there to do therapy with. And I swear to God, I still don't know what that means. So what on earth were we doing for 15 years? But that's what he said at the end of it. But
okay, I'm going to hold you there.
Okay.
Okay, because we'll have plenty of time to keep coming and unpacking.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to pass over to Vicky.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want this one? Or that one?
Choices.
Okay, so I am theatre director, playwright. I started out as a punk. I grew up in a small village in the northeast of England and loved punk. We're talking about not the first wave of punk, I'm obviously not that old, you can tell, obviously, second wave of punk. But yeah, it gave me a keen eye on what the status quo was, and I didn't like it very much. I became quite politically active from there. Always been interested in social and cultural change, and have had mental health problems since I was 7, through tracing back. I just didn't know I had them, and didn't identify as a disabled person until I was about 30, because I didn't know I could fit into that gang with mental health problems. I also now have mobility impairment and a hearing impairment, so I'm a triple threat, folks. I like telling hidden and mistold stories. I'm interested in action and getting things done. And so I've got 27 years experience as an artist. But in the middle, when I came out as a disabled person, I realised that things weren't working. I had to be an educator all of the time while I was trying to be an artist. And so I thought, I can't continue to do these two things, so for a while I'm going to be a troublemaker. Pinch your word there, yeah, tricksters unite. And so, yeah, I became a strategist, really, an activist, but in quite strategic and clever and cunning ways. I infiltrated the mainstream a little bit, always in disabled-led organisations. So I was CEO of Arts and Disability Ireland and Arcadea, which was a regional organisation. I'm primarily interested in telling the best stories that I can in the best ways that I can. And so I want the environment that I make those stories in to be as accessible as possible for me and for other people. And so that's what some of the strategic work was about, making sure we had an accessible, friendly environment. And also, then later I've come back to my own practice because I want to see kind of the stories that I'm interested in that are relevant to me and my community on stage. So I am interested in representation as well. I have worked predominantly in theatre, sometimes in spoken word because it feels more kind of urgent and direct, and also dabbled in film. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and say that, I've done all sorts of different things. I've tried all sorts of different ways. But I do find the social model of disability a really useful anchor. Partly because it's not the medical model of disability, which is a deficit model which describes us as tragic, quite often as needy, as in quite a negative way. And so the social model for me was a transformation. I first read about it, I think, in 1994 or something like that. And it's taken me a long time to work through what that means for me and for other people that I work with. And so I developed a project called Cultural Shift, which was at Arc Stockton, an art centre in Stockton. It was a disabled-led project operating on 3 different levels. And primarily, it was an artistic project, so it was about making sure there were opportunities for disabled artists in a really good environment. So the other part of the project was making sure that the art centre was kind of accessible and understood what disability was, not as in a medical context, but as a social phenomenon, and the fact that they were part of obstacles and barriers to us kind of participating fully. It was an amazing project. It lasted for 3 years, which is quite good going, because funding's really hard to come by. And out of that, we've got still, you know, a strategic legacy. Is my time running up? Yeah.
Close.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, out of that have come other opportunities for artists to collectively kind of work together. One of the things that we did say was we developed an artistic policy which, so a lot of the strategic work has been about persuading the arts world to understand what the social model of disability is, because it's part of a journey towards equality. The social model for me doesn't have all the answers, it's not without its problems, but at the moment it's the best thing that we've got to communicate the possibilities of access and equality. And so we built that into the artistic policy of Cultural Shift at ARC, that we were working along the lines of, and with artists who were kind of looking into the social model of disability. And also, just very quickly to finish, I'm not an academic person at all, I'm about practice, but I am doing a practice-based PhD at the moment, and that's because I really want to test my understanding through my own work of how far the social model can actually take me, and whether it's useful artistically, or is it better in that social realm, promoting equality and accessible opportunities. I'm exploring whether there is such a thing as a disability palette and a disability aesthetic, which are things that I believe in as an artist, but I need space to test them. And so, yeah, I'm examining how useful the social model is in my artistic practice. At the moment, though, I'm an advocate of the social model of disability.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, and our last panellist is Paul.
Hello. The joy of going last is that you tick off everything that everyone said that you were going to say. So I am going to kind of paraphrase some of what's been said, but I might as well stick to my script because I'm scared of Jo. Not just Jo, I'm scared of all strong, independent women, which I have so many in my life because they call me on my bullshit constantly. So basically, I've gone through life with a hidden disability, it's mental health. Sometimes, yeah, that's quite, so I actually tend to state it. I actually embrace my diagnosis. I totally understand why people don't want a label. I support that. I would never name someone. I work with people that do have a diagnosis but would never say it publicly. I think it's people's choice whether to reject or to own or declare their diagnosis. Just to let you know, I choose to live medication free. I have been on lithium and antidepressants. I've been medication free for 15 years. The way I did that was by treating it the same as a food intolerance. I looked at everything that was triggered by my mental health, or what triggered my mental health, and then I cut it out of my life. It's very dramatic. I'm happy to expand on that during the day. When I was first diagnosed with mental health, there wasn't even a box on the DLA forms. So when I couldn't work and was told to claim disabilities, you had to describe your mental illness in terms of a physical disability. Now, after a few years, there was a tick box that says, is your disability mental health? And actually, I was declared disabled by the Benefits Agency. I got diagnosed in my second year of my degree. I didn't know what to do when I left. I completed my degree with something back in the real world and had to live with housing and bills and payment. I was advised to go and sign on for benefits. And that was the first time I was told I was disabled, and I was told I'd be disabled for life, and that I would never work, and that was at the age of 25. And I was also told I'd be dead by 30 unless I radically changed my life. So by the time I got to 30, I suddenly thought, I've got to find something to do now, because I've accidentally lived and annoyed everybody. And recently, in the last few years, I've now been declared non-disabled by PIP. So the benefit agency declared me disabled, and I now said I'm not disabled, but nothing's happened in between. The other thing I do is, as well as an artist, I do work a lot with Public Health Wales in the NHS. I started off working as a filmmaker, just working making films on their behalf, and then I ended up training their comms team, and now I help write policy, and I've been a consultant. This has been like a 15-year journey of me learning how they speak and they use and how they work, and they are looking at my experience and the way I approach the world and feel they don't have that in their organisational structure, and they will get me in sometimes just to be there to ask the awkward questions. So I'm just going to describe, so basically in terms of my disability, my strongest, my first experience was the medical model. And for all of us that know that, if you ask for any help or for any benefits, what you have to do is describe the worst version of yourself on your very worst day, and that is the start of every conversation and relationship you have, and you must never ever tell them that you're feeling better. Because the minute you tell your counsellor you're going, I've had a good day, then that's it, benefits and services are moved on. And so I would actually invent bad things going to a good counselling session to be miserable about, which was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Also the language I started off as a patient, I then became a client, I then became a service user, and now I'm someone with lived experience. Again, nothing's changed. And what was interesting is in terms of my approach to the social model, is something that Joe picked up on, which I hadn't realised, is by working so strongly in the medical model. On an application form, I described mental health sufferers. And she pointed out, actually, within the social model, sufferers, I didn't think of it as a negative term. I'm just so used to being someone that suffers with mental health. But of course, the word sufferer is got negative connotations. And it was just that little shift that Joe just pointed out. And I thought, yeah, why am I declaring myself in the negative all the time? So my experience with the social model was through Unlimited, I've made applications for jobs, I've made applications to the Arts Council, some successful, some not. But what I love about Unlimited is kind of what we've touched on, is that, you know, they're looking at you as a person. And what I do with Unlimited is I tell them the best version of me on my best day and what it is that I think I can achieve. And then I describe my limitations in terms of my access needs. And to me, that's a huge difference from the medical model. So I'm going in, not running myself down. It's the hardest thing for me to do. Actually saying positives about myself is a lot harder than telling everybody what's wrong with me. And it's still something I'm getting used to saying. I'm aware, I don't know where I'm in my 5 minutes, but I feel that we're kind of going time. And I would just, for the rest of the day, I just think one of the questions that I have constantly asked myself, and I think it's worth asking in this context, is when you view yourself, do you see yourself as a disabled artist or an artist with a disability? And I think there's quite a big difference in those two statements.
Okay, thank you. I'll just position myself in relation to the debate. So I can remember I started to lose my hearing at 12, 13. Hysterically for me, it was assumed that it was a mental health issue and that I had a problem with authority because I'd stopped listening to teachers. And it took 2 years to work out I couldn't hear them. Hurrah! When I went to university, the thing that I most strongly remember, I was so pleased to go that they were then going, oh, you won't be able to access this and you won't be able to access this. And it was one of those arty-farty kind of drama courses. And there was one bit where you had to wear a blindfold and hit people with a rolled up newspaper. I don't know if they still do that at drama school. We spent ages on it. And I was told to sit at the edge of the room because obviously if I put a blindfold on, I can't hear the cues or I can't take part. And I was so pleased at that point that I was allowed in that space, that I felt that that's what access was being allowed in that space. When I'd done my degree, I did a postgrad on a Theatre of the Deaf course, and the first question was, well, what access do you need? And I was going, I don't need any. I've just done a degree, you know, I'm fine, I can manage my own needs. And they went, well, don't you want a lip speaker? Don't you want a note taker? Do you use sign language? We can put you on a speed course. What is it you need to function at your best? Not what can you get by on, but what do you need to function at your best? And that for me was just my light bulb moment. The fact that actually nobody before had really seen me at my best they'd just seen all my coping strategies kind of come into play. Yes, that was my big kind of shift into thinking about access, and myself as a disabled person, not as it being a negative thing that I just had to quietly cope with, but something that could actually be built into the way in which I worked to enable me to function at my best. So I just wanted to check with everybody whether we've got their kind of social model light bulbs. I just want to kind of go back to Cheryl actually, because I remember we did a day at Eclipse, or with Eclipse, where we were talking about disability and race. And I can remember you said something really interesting about like the number of labels that as a black disabled woman you had to wear, and actually that you had to pick which battles to fight. I wonder whether you could expand on that, and also the place for disability within black culture.
Well, as I was saying, with the label, the personality disorder, which is now 2. So I'm a depressive or a suicidal depressive, and I'm a black woman with mental health problems, etc., etc. And it is about which battle do you fight today, which one is the most important. So sometimes it's just simply about being black and getting people to, when you're a black artist, not being put into some little corner because they think that you're a niche and that people aren't going to be interested in your problems because black problems cannot possibly be universal. And then it's sort of, when I talk about the disability, do I also talk about how that's compounded by the fact that a lot of people in the black community don't believe in mental health problems. They think those are white people's problems, or that you're acting like a white person if you talk about that. That's my own family I'm talking about. And I've run into that with it's some sort of self-indulgent thing. My family, despite the fact that I've been in an asylum, that I've tried to commit suicide, most of them still think that if I had not done the arts and I was making more money, that I wouldn't have any problems. So I've sent them information and all sorts. They completely refuse to believe that I'm a depressive. And that's because as a child, I hid it so much because it was considered so bad. And I didn't want to be a bad influence on my younger brothers and sisters. So that's how I grew up thinking about myself, that if I was honest, I would be some sort of terrible influence on my own brothers and sisters, and therefore I must hide, hide, hide. And it's still difficult, and I'm also gay, so I'm a lesbian, again, incredibly frowned upon by some people in the black community. So it's like multiple oppressions if I really want to go that way. There's a book that's out right now called, Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race. And I came to that conclusion when I was at uni because a lot of times when you bring up the fact that there is racial discrimination that's obvious, people get really defensive and they don't hear another word you say. So I've decided that that's not my problem, that is a white person's problem, and I don't exist to enlighten people about race. That one I just like, nope, not doing that. About my mental health problems, part of the reason why I keep doing these shows like Alaska is because there are young women, white and black, in their 20s, who are just like I was in my 20s, who come up to me afterwards in tears. One girl cried for an hour because she was diverse as well, she was Asian, and her parents totally refused to listen to her. And the reason why I talk about these things is so that they can see there's somebody who's damn near 60 who survived. I survived, and I became an artist, and I thrive. And like my new show is, again, trying to get people to understand what it's like, because what I discovered when I finally did get therapy for the personality disorder, it was an all-female group. We had all been sexually or emotionally abused as children, mostly both. And I think that particular diagnosis is really tied in with sexual and emotional abuse of children. And that I think people need to when the Me Too conversation is going on, people need to understand what the mental health consequences of, again, that hidden and, repressed really widespread problem. I first realized how widespread it was. I was at Contact Theatre. There were a group of about 10 women who were all artists, and I don't know why it came up. It turned out that all of them had been sexually abused as children. Every single one. And I think that it's the most common and most denied thing that goes on in, and then the actual mental health consequences, whatever it is you do to your brain to survive and keep going and repress that, you know, deal with that chaos, I don't think people understand.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there, because I think what's really interesting for me here is that we've come on to what do we make work about, and from what perspective do we make work? Because many artists draw on their own personal experience within the work that they create. And you know, I can remember a point within that, you know, Tony defined, you know, what disability art kind of was, work that talks about that experience of being disabled. But not necessarily work that talks about the experience of a particular impairment, and there's kind of a distinction there. So before I hand on to Tony to just explore that, giving him a few moments to think about it, just to be clear that from Unlimited, we don't just support disability art by a narrow definition, because we support the work that artists want to make, some of which may fit a definition of what disability art is, some of which may not fit any definition at all, even of what art might be. And we're constantly intrigued and fascinated by that boundary pushing that artists do.
Yeah, I think people get very confused because I'm a disabled person. Do I make disability arts? Do I call myself a disability artist? It is massively confusing. So I think it's right to say, I mean, my perspective is there's a canon of disability art. And I think you can look at work and go, Noemi Lackmeyer is a really great example, because you can look at it and you don't go, oh yeah, that's disability arts. But once you read into the work, you can think, yeah, that is a very interesting look at the world from a disabled person's perspective, and therefore it can fit into a canon called disability arts if we want it to. And I wouldn't want to feel constrained by, a lot of my work can be seen as relating to my experience as a disabled person, and that manifests itself in my artwork. But I don't necessarily make it think, okay, that can go in the disability arts box, that one goes in the it could go anywhere you like box. I think artists just make work. And sometimes, and I was thinking about this when talking to somebody else, I think sometimes we make art, we don't actually know what it is. It's just something that's an idea that we've got hold of, and we're trying to make sense out of it. And for artists, we turn it into a piece of art. And then sometimes we look at it and think, oh, that's what that's about then. It's about those thoughts that were tumbling around in my head. I could use lots of examples of my own work, I won't do, but it's only afterwards that I've made it that I've thought, yeah, that is really about disability. It's about oppression, or it's about our place in the world. And you can start to unpick that when you look at my work, and I'm really interested in what Vicky comes up with as part of her academic work.
Yeah, I wanted to go to Vicky next, because to take that as a premise for a PhD, I think is absolutely fascinating. And I just wonder whether you can kind of expand on that just a bit more in terms of how is it influencing your artistic practice?
So I've just completed my first year and had to do a report, and the first year is it's going wild. I made loads of work, so actually tested lots of ideas. I think the social model of disability allowed us to look at the ways that our identity had been constructed, and also therefore represented in culture. And so people much cleverer than myself identified stereotypes, and we talk about 10 main stereotypes, but then each impairment's got, which each person in the room will be aware of, a different set of stereotypes. Traditionally, for 2,000 years, we've told the stories of disabled people in a very particular way, in a very particular framework. And I'm interested in shaking that up a bit, looking at how we can challenge those tropes, which means those common stories. And so yeah, so I'm just trying to.
Can you give us a concrete example of some of those very traditional stories that people use negatively?
Okay, so let's have a think. The film Forrest Gump is an example. So massive Hollywood, massively grossing film, but actually represented a character that is problematic in lots of different ways, is usually the butt of several people's jokes. The fact is it wasn't really his story. In Shakespeare, in Charles Dickens, disability is used in a negative way to pitch characters as villains or as defective in some way. Actually, a good example is the printing press was invented in the 15th century and used initially for kind of political campaigning, and political opponents, and this kind of still happens in lots of ways, pitched themselves as disabled in some way, as defective in some way, so therefore they were a weaker candidate. And there are loads of examples of kind of cartoon images of that, and that has stayed with us right through to Donald Trump, who I'm certainly not going to celebrate in any way, but a lot of the conversation around him and mental health is really problematic, because I don't want to be in the same boat as Donald Trump, thank you very much. There's something else going on there. Yeah, so
yeah, that's really good. Can I come to Paul and ask, I'm really interested in work that is produced for an NHS trust or something like that. How far are you able to kind of push against some of those stereotypes within that work? And I'm just interested in, for those commissioning bodies, how much they're kind of going, oh no, you need to present, this more negative perspective, otherwise we're not going to get any money, or otherwise we're not going to get any support. That kind of knife edge that you described earlier.
Yeah, I think what was really interesting is I've done an autobiographical play called Gods and Kings, and it's about that period, about when I was diagnosed, and being at 23, being at university, all things that are still very current now, what people are facing. And I decided to write it purely from the patient's perspective. So I kept myself as an unreliable witness, because it was how I perceived events, not actually necessarily as they happened. And also I just said to the small team that I had around me, this is not about me being a victim, this is not me about making any decisions on other people, of other people, and the one thing that we mustn't try to do is protect my reputation. There is stuff in that play that people can't believe that I've admitted in public, and to be honest, the stuff that I admitted to in those plays was a point about I may never work again after this, and this kind of led to two things. It was within the arts. I was funded by the Arts Council of Wales, and they were very honest and said, we don't know if there is an audience for this kind of work. It's so different to the way that people normally talk about it. So they said, can you please do 5 productions in one theatre, which I did, the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff. And it was a test to see, is there any audience for this work? What was interesting is, so we did get an audience. We got very good reviews, and as a result, we are now doing a national tour. But what was really interesting to myself and my creative partner, Tamsin, she came on board. She has a mental health diagnosis. She came on board as my assistant director, and it was really important that she was there, because I said, anyone that comes and sees this play may be coming to experience something that they've done. It has to be authentic for them, more than anything else. She was diagnosed but hadn't told the world, hadn't even told many people that she had a diagnosis. through the programme of that play, through the process of that play, she felt so empowered by being involved and the reaction of people from the industry that actually she now declares herself her diagnosis, and we do Q&As after the show about mental health. What was interesting was it then got picked up by Welsh Government, who saw it, who have now said that it should be going out and being seen by every doctor, every teacher. Public Health Wales booked it as a fringe event for their national conference, and it was so successful in terms of a patient experience. It's now been booked again for the main plenary, which will be to 500 health professionals from across Wales, and seen that it should be implemented as training. Now, part of that is because I was very patient with Public Health Wales for 15 years. You know, I had many things that I thought they were doing wrong, but also they're an organisation that are very hard to shift, and I shifted them very, very slowly. The first thing that I did, I said, you need to lose some of the cliches. So depression, stop showing people with their head in their hands. Please stop showing people sliding slowly down a wall. Stop shouting at a mirror. You know, these were all the things that still were the default photographs within mental health. If I'd have gone in and told them what they were doing wrong all in one go on the first day, they would have shut their door, you know, to me straight away. So by the time that I did the play independently of them, but I had such a strong reputation with them for my professionalism and my ability to collaborate and work with this body, that they came out as individuals to see the play. And then they supported it, and now they are marketing it, they are putting it through, it's like I could have not asked for more support. And the fact is they've asked Tamsin and I to set up an organisation, Arts and Health, which we are doing, to become consultants not just for the mental health service in Wales now, but across the whole of the NHS. Because they feel that the conversation has to change. And we've proved not only that we are able to have that conversation, but we are willing to work with them and not in an aggressive, confrontational way. We will be confrontational, but then we will work with them to find a solution.
So there's something there for me which is about who we align ourselves with and how quickly or slowly we want those processes to go. Because I've also heard stories, you know, from artists who've worked in a health context that hasn't been as supportive. And you know, I'm sure we'll all have, and everybody in the room will have kind of conversations about where do you position your art. We often have artists who come to Unlimited and kind of go, I don't know if I want to put myself out there as a disabled artist. I don't know if I'm ready to identify in that way. And again, we say that obviously by applying to Unlimited, in a way, yes, you've kind of outed yourself as a disabled artist. However, we don't have control over people's individual publicity, their own material about their work. We do not tell them how to describe themselves or how to describe that work. On our side, we describe it in a particular way, yeah. But actually, nobody outside the industry knows or cares you know, about Unlimited. It's not something that's branded in that way. It's about an industry-to-industry thing. So we're interested in shifting the industry. We don't have that much relationship with the end user kind of audience member. So actually it's then how an individual chooses to describe their work that's the most important thing, rather than how we do that.
Can I just add one thing on that? Is obviously if you are successful, there is a point where you question, am I only successful because of the disability element? You know, did I only get this funding for this reason? Is there actually any worth to my work? And that was answered for me just before Christmas, because kind of on a whim, I sent my play to Oberon Books in London, just an open subscription, emailed them the script, didn't tell them it was autobiographical, they didn't know me, they didn't know any details, they read the work and they are publishing the work based on the strength of the work, and it was only afterwards that they found out it was kind of a true story, and that was my backstory. To be honest, that's the first time that I've actually really had confidence in my work, because I've always, you know, with someone with disability, you question your worth, and actually, that was the first time I could say, no, it's because the work stood up on its own, not because it had disability in front of it.
wanted to start the afternoon just by kind of hearing from the panel this morning, what were the things that came up within their groups that surprised them, or that they thought were really interesting, or that offered a different perspective on, you know, on the topic that they hadn't necessarily considered before, or that they thought would be useful to kind of share. Just, yeah, things that you thought were interesting, and it could be a series of bullet points, it could be one particular point expanded on, up to you.
Me first?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to do, because I've had fantastic conversations with people, I'm going to look at the things I've circled, because they drew things together. So, things that came up that were interesting. So to lots of people that I spoke to, it was a relatively new idea, the social model of disability. Not everyone. There were some people who have very experienced it within the disability arts movement. But for lots of people, either they hadn't heard the term before, some people weren't aware that disability arts as a kind of a movement existed. People talked about difference as a way of dividing people, and concerns therefore about you know, self-definition. How do I define myself as an artist? And that came up several times in each group, in each of the groups, that there are concerns about how we do describe ourselves. The subject of language came up. What's the right language to use in different circumstances? And how much does the social model kind of guide that? I mean, my own experience is that there are some sort of guidelines around social model language, which can be shared, but then each individual artist absolutely has the right to define themselves as they, you know, as they choose. Legislation came up. We talked a little bit about the 2010 Equality Act and the impact that that's had on everyone and how they feel about their identities. In one group, strongly came across a really creative bunch of people, rename the social model. I think with a view to just making it sound more sexy. It's it's a kind of, it's not a very inspirational name, so maybe we could all think about that at some point. 104 Films. I'm so sorry, there you are, hello. I'm so sorry I forgot your name. I have a memory problem, Justin. Has made a film called The Social Model. And so we should get a link and share that with everybody here. That would be great. Normativity. What is normal came up. And so that's a huge subject. And all of us are experts in that. But it's looking at how that fits into kind of dominant thinking, the status quo, who says what's normal, and then from that, how do we define ourselves? Let's have a look. We did talk about visible and invisible impairments, our bodies, and some people feel that maybe the social model does or doesn't relate to that, and there's big discussions about that. We kind of know that. Context. Everything has its place as long as it's in context. This came up about language as well, and how we identify publicly and then individually. I think I might have already said this, but it's quite important, and how people choose to define themselves personally, in small, intimate conversations, or then in the wider society, for example, for jobs or whatever, can be concerning. Equally, it can be empowering, depending on who you're having the conversation with. And also, if you're someone who's admitting to something for the first time, that can unlock doors for other people and be empowering for other people to say, oh, that's me too. So yeah, I think that's my 5 minutes, and
perfect.
Is that okay?
Tony.
Am I going next?
Yeah.
You've covered a lot of things that we've talked about. A couple of things that I'd pick up on. I call it passing, or sort of normalising strategies, where many of us do things where we think, how am I going to deal with this situation and my impairment so that I don't have to ask for what in law is called reasonable adjustments. And we all, when we had the discussion, we were all saying, oh yeah, I do X or I do Y. So, I don't want to, I pretend to look at my phone while light changes in a room, or I pretend to look at a phone because I want to, just feel comfortable in the space, or make sure I feel all right where I am. So that sort of normalisation how do you coping strategies for not having to constantly be talking about your impairment? And that's another thing we talked about quite a lot. The absolutely wearying need to be constantly asked questions about, what Johnny Crescendo once said in a song, where did you get that leg? I don't know whether anybody knows has ever even heard of Johnny Crescendo or know about the song, but he wrote a song, Where'd You Get That Leg? And it was, and then he goes through this whole ritualised song of, he got it from Tesco's, or he got it on the NHS, or I can't remember any of the lyrics. But it is that thing about people thinking that it's okay to say, what happened to you then? Or, were you born like that? Or did you have an accident? Or all that sort of stuff. Where you would never say that in any other situation, or make any sort of personal comment that it's perfectly all right to make personal comments about disabled people. We talked about medical model dominance, which is why we all fall into the trap of then thinking in the medical model ourselves, or our families think about it in the medical model way, so we are, subsumed into that oppression without even realising we're being oppressed. It's a bit like my going in that goods van. You can't imagine today being told you were going in that without going, hang on, I'm not going in there. Never questioned it, never thought it wasn't a good thing. We talked about organisations like SHAPE, why organisations exist, and maybe like Unlimited, why can't people just go straight to the man? So we talked a little bit about how organisations like SHAPE or programmes like Unlimited build confidence not only in disabled artists but also in venues, so that you somehow act as a conduit or an interface between the two. It's like matchmaking, isn't it, in some strange sort of way. We talked a bit about crossovers, so people might have been very aware of things like feminism but not know anything at all about disability politics, and yet there are great crossovers between other oppressed minorities. And the final thing we talked about just now was about language, and you brought up the term, you don't mind me saying this to you, but you brought up the term interabled, which I'd never heard of, maybe because I'm not down with the kids, but all the time throughout my life as a disabled person, people have tried to come up with alternatives to the word disabled, and they've always been sort of failures, trendy failures. And I think we just have to accept that within the social model, the word disabled means disabled by barriers. So we are disabled by the external environment. People's attitudes is nothing to do with our impairments. So whilst I don't recognise the term able-bodied, I just don't. There's no kind of I can't think of the right word, but there's no alternative to that. That's probably my 5 minutes.
Okay, it is.
Off we go.
Okay. Again, covered a lot of stuff that we've all covered. The one that I'm going to pick that interested me was partly because by sitting on the panel being last, I suddenly went, oh look, there's a mentally ill theatre maker, oh there's a mentally ill theatre maker, and oh I'm the third mentally ill theatre maker out of 4. And you suddenly think, what else can you add? And that kind of led to one of the conversations is, actually there is a need for much more diversity of voices and experiences across all stories, rather than not just disability. But often what we found is sometimes you can have funders or venues, you can pitch something and go, oh, we've already done that. Oh, we've done mental health. We've done domestic abuse. We've done, we've ticked that box. And I think so. There's a you know a way of normalising or becoming that subject matter is that actually it's not about just having one version. It's about just having many, because we're all individuals and we all have different paths and experiences. And that led to kind of another conversation which I've had with venues, and there were some venues in the groups. It's booking work as well. You know, there's an issue with booking work with audiences, with marketing. You know, how do you program work? Is there an audience for it? How do you promote it? Do you put disability in the title? You know, if you do, are you only attracting a certain audience? Are you changing their expectations? Are you making a group of, you know, a large section of your audience go, I'm not seeing that, that's going to be worthy or whiny or preachy? And that's something that both sides, you know, the disabled artists and the makers of work and the venues and audiences actually need to work with together. So the point is, it's just a show. Obviously, within the synopsis, you'll talk about the subject matter, but does it need to be labelled? And that led to another conversation with people, with performers with disabilities. You know, if you are visually impaired, but you're an actor and you're playing a role, do you need to put on the poster contains visually impaired actors? You know, because I was talking about a show that was done at the WMC in Cardiff. It was about someone who was deaf, and she was, one of the characters was playing it, and she was a deaf actor, but she asked not to be noted as a deaf performer on the poster. Then they got complaints from the public that they've got a hearing actress to play a deaf actress, and then they had to explain actually she is deaf, but she chose in her right to be known as a performer, not a deaf. And so these kind of things, there's like, the only way to do that is to keep trying and keep learning and keep explaining. And I think one word of caution that I think for us is it's very easy for us to be slighted or get frustrated. But as a venue said once, is that it's terrifying for some of us to make these mistakes. And sometimes it's easier for it to not engage and not book than risk upsetting people. And so yes, call us on what we do wrong, express your disappointment, but please work with us to improve it rather than make us pull away from the issue. So that's...
Again, some of the things that we talked about, you've already mentioned. There was, in one group, someone who does identify as disabled asked, was it a betrayal to make art from what she considered pain and suffering, and to use those terms in referring to it? And the group sort of said that it's up to an individual artist to make whatever kind of art they want to make, but that's different from the structure of society, which we're talking about with the social model. And another thing that came up in another group was that there's a difference, do we need a holistic approach towards people rather than the band-aid of the medical model, on what research is being done. Then we brought up the problem with gene or stem therapy. Should we be trying to eradicate disability? I thought that was a pretty big question. And then another person said, what are there positives about depression, say? Are there things that it gives to you rather than always seeing it as a negative? Does it give you more empathy? Can you look at your disability as a spur to achievement? Problems, the social model, with whose social model, inherent problems. Some organizations intrinsically do the social model, some just ignore it. The big thing that actually came out of that group was that the social care system is not at all caring, militarized, and rigid, and that someone felt we might lose a whole generation of artists because of the way the social care system operates at the moment. For instance, on assessment, when you're being assessed, for your PIP or whatever, show me your worst day, perform your disability. And then they felt that it was even more sinister than show you deserve charity. It was that you must show that you are grateful for these crumbs that you're getting, and that people want you to live out their prejudice. And the problem is you might stop existing beyond how they want you to be. And feeling that the arts system is becoming the same, and that access is too often just an afterthought, as far as accessing it. We mentioned the whole thing about visible versus invisible issues like mental health, neurodiversity, such as autism, ME, ADHD, and others. But people said there were issues with late diagnosis, late in life, and then relearning how to look at your life in light of this diagnosis, so that it might be a tool to help you understand how your life actually has been, not so the diagnosis can be double-edged, not just the medical model, but actually something that you need to understand, but that it medicalizes you at the same time. It was brought up that, you know, visible and invisible issues are categorically different. Someone with a physical disability might have trouble, for instance, if they're an actor, even getting into the room because people won't consider them for the role because of, you know, just the optics of the whole situation. Whereas someone with an invisible disability might get in the room and get the job, but then might not get the support they need afterwards to make that, you know, to really flourish. And some people felt that there was still too much of a focus within the disability sort of politics itself on what they call the big three. Deafness, wheelchair access, and I couldn't get what the last one was, sorry.
Visual impairment.
And visual impairment, thank you. So that there's even within disability politics, that invisible disabilities are ignored. I'm trying to think, was there another biggie? I don't know if there was something else big, but that there was. I think that's pretty much it. They were saying that the funding system needs to consider that developing disabled performers needs more time. It doesn't really fit in easily into a 3 weeks rehearsal sort of period, and that artists need development, and that some artists also need support in developing their ideas before they can even begin to approach the funding system.
And I think they're two really good examples of real life situations that prevent disabled people from engaging within the arts and cultural sector. You know, what if you can't physically get to a space or take part in a conversation, or what if you cannot find a way through the structures that are designed to give you money? So when we break into the working groups, I suggest that one group take each of, I presume we're doing 4 groups? She says, looking for Melissa.
Joe, can I just add something to what you said?
Yes, if you do that. When we work out how many groups we've got, I think they're 2 really good starting points to look at. If you look at that from a social model perspective or a medical model perspective, what are the different solutions that could potentially come up?
I don't know where the microphone is, so I'll use this one.
Sorry, Thomas.
Where's the other mic? Oh, it's there. That's all right.
2 groups.
Thank you.
2, correct.
I just wanted to add to what you said, that the other thing we should think about in terms of resources is the Royal Opera House gets £28 million a year from the Arts Council. In comparison, the disability sector gets minuscule amount of money, and the Royal Opera House isn't the only opera house in town. So as well as the 28 million plus that the Royal Opera House gets, all the other opera houses get vast amounts of money for what I would argue is a fairly minority art form. And so when we talk about disability arts and unlimited, we are operating in peanut land. You know, SHAPE operates on less money than the chief executive of the Arts Council and one of your senior management team get in terms of salary. So just keep putting it in context about how little money comes into our sector. And if we want to change that, we should be lobbying funders for much more money for this sector. SHAPE's been on the same standstill budget for the last 9 years, which is a massive loss of revenue when you think, you know, in terms of inflation. And not just SHAPE, but other organisations.
Yes, I think the very first thing you said, Ria, was like, you know, is unlimited limited? Yes, it is, massively. Because it ends in October 2020. So, you know, it may be that another round, you know, another, you know, grant is there, but at the moment there is an end point, you know, in sight. That may be something that, you know, it's in discussion, about whether that shifts or changes. So I know there's more conversation, but we'll have it in small groups because not everybody finds a large group. So we're going to split into 2 separate groups, and these are working groups. These are about, let's pick a situation and then let's look for as many solutions as we can find. It's not about analysing each one or coming up with perfect solutions, but it's, are there solutions? Are there things that we're not yet doing that we could be doing? And are they coming from a kind of a more social perspective, social model perspective? Are they coming from a medical model perspective? Or are they coming from neither of those, but from some kind of new territory?